Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where today we are going to be continuing to read The Sleeper Awakes by H.G. Wells. So, let's get going. Not a familiar outline anywhere broke the cluster of gigantic shapes below. St. Paul's he knew survived, and many of the old buildings in Westminster, embedded out of sight, arched over and covered in among the giant growths of this great age. The Thames, too, made no fall and gleam of silver to break the wilderness of the city. The thirsty water mains drank up every drop of its waters before they reached the walls. Its bed and estuary, scoured and sunken, was now a canal of sea-water, and a race of grimy bargemen brought the heavy materials of trade from the pool thereby beneath the very feet of the workers. Faint and dim in the eastward, between earth and sky, hung the clustering masts of the colossal shipping in the pool. For all the heavy traffic, for which there was no need of haste, came in gigantic sailing ships from the ends of the earth, and the heavy goods for which there was urgency in mechanical ships of a smaller, swifter sort. And to the south, over the hills, came vast aqueducts with sea water for the sewers, and in 3 separate directions ran pallid lines, the roads stippled with moving grey specks. On the first occasion that offered, he was determined to go out and see these roads. That would come after the flying ship he was presently to try. His attendant officer described them as a pair of gently curving surfaces 100 yards wide, each one for the traffic going in one direction, and made of a substance called edamite, an artificial substance, so far as he could gather, resembling toughened glass. Along this shot a strange traffic of narrow rubber-shod vehicles, great single wheels, 2- and 4-wheeled vehicles, sweeping along at velocities of from 1 to 6 miles a minute. Railroads had vanished, a few embankments remained as rust-crowned trenches here and there. Some few formed the cores of Edomite ways. Among the first things to strike his attention had been the great fleets of advertisement balloons and kites that receded in irregular vistas northward and southward along the lines of the aeroplane journeys. No great aeroplanes were to be seen. Their passengers had ceased, and only one little-seeming monoplane circled high in the blue distance above the Surrey hills, an unimpressive, soaring speck. A thing Graham had already learnt, and which he found very hard to imagine, was that nearly all the towns in the country, and almost all the villages, had disappeared. Here and there only, he understood, some gigantic hotel-like edifice stood amid square miles of some single cultivation, and preserved the name of a town, as Bournemouth, Wareham, or Swanage. Yet the officer had speedily convinced him how inevitable such a change had been. The old order had dotted the country with farmhouses, and every 2 or 3 miles was the ruling landlord's estate, and the place of the inn and cobbler, the grocer's shop and church, the village. Every 8 miles or so was the country town, where lawyer, corn merchant, wool stapler, saddler, veterinary surgeon, doctor, draper, milliner, and so forth lived. Every 8 miles, simply because that 8-mile marketing journey, for there and back, was as much as was comfortable for the farmer. But directly the railways came into play, and after them the light railways, and all the swift new motor cars that had replaced wagons and horses and so on, as the high roads began to be made of wood and rubber, and edamite, and all sorts of elastic durable substances. The necessity of having such frequent market towns disappeared. And the big towns grew. They drew the worker with the gravitational force of seemingly endless work, the employer with their suggestion of an infinite ocean of labour. And as the standard of comfort rose, as the complexity of the mechanism of living increased, life in the country had become more and more costly, or narrow and impossible. The disappearance of vicar and squire, the extinction of the general practitioner by the city specialist, had robbed the village of its last touch of culture. After telephone, kinematograph and phonograph had replaced newspaper, book, schoolmaster and letter, to live outside the range of the electric cables was to live an isolated savage. In the country were neither means of being clothed nor fed, according to the refined conceptions of the time, no efficient doctors for an emergency, no company, and no pursuits. Moreover, mechanical appliances in agriculture made one engineer the equivalent of 30 labourers, so inverting the condition of the city clerk in the days when London was scarce inhabitable because of the coaly foulness of its air. The labourers now came to the city and its life and delights at night to leave it again in the morning. The city had swallowed up humanity. Man had entered upon a new stage in his development. First had come the nomad, the hunter. Then had followed the agriculturalist of the agricultural state, whose towns and cities and ports were but the headquarters and markets of the countryside. And now, logical consequence of an epoch of invention, was this huge new aggregation of men. Such things as these, simple statements of fact though they were to contemporary men, strained Graham's imagination to picture. And when he glanced over beyond there, at the strange things that existed on the continent, it failed him altogether. He had a vision of city beyond city, cities on great plains, cities beside great rivers, vast cities along the sea margin, cities girdled by snowy mountains. Over a great part of the earth the English tongue was spoken. Taken together with its Spanish, American, and Hindu and Pidgin dialects, it was the everyday language of 2/3 of humanity. On the continent, save as remote and curious survivals, 3 other languages alone held sway. German, which reached to Antioch and Genoa and jostled Spanish English as at Cadiz, a Gallicized Russian, which met the Indian English in Persia and Kurdistan and the Pidgin English in Pekin, and French still clear and brilliant, the language of lucidity, which shared the Mediterranean with the Indian English and German and reached through a dialect to the Congo. And everywhere now through the city-set earth, save in the administered black belt territories of the tropics, the same cosmopolitan social organization prevailed, and everywhere from pole to equator his property and his responsibilities extended. The whole world was civilized, the whole world dwelt in cities, the whole world was his property. Out of the dim southwest, glittering and strange, voluptuous and in some way terrible, shone those pleasure cities of which the kinematograph, phonograph, and the old man in the street had spoken. Strange places reminiscent of the legendary Sybaris, cities of art and beauty, mercenary art and mercenary beauty, sterile, wonderful cities of motion and music, whither repaired all who profited by the fierce, inglorious economic struggle that went on in the glaring labyrinth below. Fierce he knew it was. How fierce he could judge from the fact that these latter-day people referred back to the England of the 19th century as the figure of an idyllic, easy-going life. He turned his eyes to the scene immediately before him again, trying to conceive the big factories of that intricate maze. And that actually brings us quite nicely to the end of the kind of the end of the episode. It brings us to the end of the reading, at least, because we have quite handily reached the end of a chapter. So, with that, we are making decent progress. I think we're now... Actually, I think we are reasonably over halfway, actually. I'm not going to double check though, because of various reasons. We can check next one tomorrow. That's not going to be a problem. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon or night. No matter what time of day it is, I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.